Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar about how you can jumpstart your automated testing efforts with the BrowseEmAll record and play feature. Before we get started, just as a quick reminder, you will get an email with the recording of the webinar after this session. And of course, you can ask any questions you might have by using the GoToWebinar questions UI, normally to the right of the screen, to enter any questions during the webinar. And if there are any, we will do a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Our goal for today is to take a look at how you can get started with automated cross-browser testing without having to learn a lot of stuff like browser automation with Selenium or really any coding skills. With the BrowseEmAll record and replay feature, we can create automated tests and run them later on manually or through the command line interface on a CI server or something like that without any coding skills necessary. So let's get started right away. Here you can see my screen and we have the cross-browser testing tool BrowseEmAll open already. And this tool runs on Windows, on macOS, and on Linux. I will show it here on Windows, but the feature set is the same for any platform. And BrowseEmAll contains a feature which is called the test recorder. And the test recorder makes it possible to record test script in an existing browser and later on record and run them again on any browser that's supported by BrowseEmAll, which means any popular desktop browser like Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, and Safari. Now let's start right away by creating a new test case. And for this example, we will assume that we need a few different test cases to test the search engine of our blog. So after we clicked on a test recorder here at the top navigation, we can record a new test. And keep in mind, this is a desktop application. So everything we can do here is running directly on my local machine, which means we could record test scripts not only for pages that are available to the public internet, but also for test environments like an internal staging environment or even a local page which runs on my local development server and is not available to the public internet at all. So here we will select recording a test and give the test a quick name. Let's assume we want to create a test case for the blog search engine. And we will need to tell BrowseEmAll which URL the test should start in. In this example, we will use our homepage simply. Now, if I click on Start Recording, we can see that Google Chrome is opening and automatically navigating to the page we wanted to test. And BrowseEmAll will now record all user interactions we do with this browser. And we can also see at the bottom right, there is injected a BrowseEmAll recorder element, which helps us create validations for our tests, because we don't want to only execute our steps, we want to also validate that it actually worked as expected. And if you take a look at the recorder, we will see that you can also instruct the test script to take a screenshot at any point you might need it, so that if you run the test again and something fails, you can inspect the screenshot to see what the error might be, a missing button, for example. Okay, now we will just browse to the blog here in question and fire off a search. Let's use Selenium as a search keyword. And we can clearly see here that it worked because we now have lots of different blog posts which all contain the word selenium somewhere either in the title or in the content of the post as well. But if we later on run this test script in an automated fashion, we don't want to sit in front of the screen and manually validating that this has worked, mainly because the test will happen so fast that you will most likely not be able to validate this correctly. And of course, we don't want to tie up the tester's time while running automated tests. So we want to validate that our search results here include the word selenium. We can do this either by using the validate text function. If I click on it, it will tell me that I now have to select the text we want to validate. And in this example, it's selenium here. And if we take a look back at BrowseEmAll, we can see here the last recorded steps. So we entered selenium into the search field. We clicked on search submit, which is the button to submit the search. And then we instructed the test script to verify the text selenium on the page. We can, of course, go one step further and click on the first search result, which will load up the post in question. And again, we could validate the text here. We could validate also an element. So let's say, for example, we want to validate that there is a picture here. We can just click on validate element and then click on the element we want to validate. So this could be some text element or here the picture element. And at the last step for our test script, we also want to take a screenshot so that if this test fails later on, we can absolutely take a look at the screenshot and we will see, for example, the image is missing or something along those lines. I would say that we can at this point consider our test script done. And it's always a nice idea to not create one really big test script that tests all functionality of our blog. Instead, we want to create small and contained test scripts that only test a specific feature of the page, so that if our test fails later on, the title of our test script will already give away what feature might not work correctly. In this example, we have named it blog search. So if the blog search test fails later on, we can assume that most likely there's something wrong with the search and not any other unrelated feature to that. If I hit stop recording now, BrowseEmAll will create a new test suite for us and also create our first test here, which we called blog search. And even gave it a descriptive name. And of course, we could now go ahead and record another test. So maybe we want to also test the blog archive functionality. And again, we will use our homepage as a starting point. Recording another test, of course, works the same as before. We get a Google Chrome instance and all user interaction will be recorded right away. We go to our blog again. And here to the right, we see the archive. We will first validate that the archive is actually available in the sidebar. And then we will click on the first archive message. And then we can validate that there should be at least one blog post in our archive for, in this example, May. You can validate this by telling it validate element on the page. And our test script should also take a screenshot so that we can inspect it if later on the test fails. Hit stop recording again. And now we can see we have two different tests in our suite, and I didn't save the name before. Because now if we click here on save, we can save our test suite for later rerunning. And we can also take a look at our file, because this is nothing else as a set of JSON files. So we named it example suite. And if we take a look here, this is just a JSON file which saves the name and which test cases we have. So here, for example, we have 2 different test cases, search and archive. Take a look at the test cases itself. It's another JSON file which contains all the test steps. We need to navigate to our page, then we click on an element, we select some text, which is the validation of text, and so on and so on. Okay, now these JSON files are great because they're very small, very contained, so we could save them in our, for example, in our repository, in our Git repository or Mercurial or whatever you're using, so that every developer has access to these tests and can run them on their own. You can also, if you already have an existing test suite, you can select Open Test Suite and select your test suite so you get them back from your repository, for example. Okay, now what we can do here is we can, of course, run these test scripts again. You can either run all tests in our test suite, or you can run an individual test. And for this example, we'll run all the tests, and we can select all the different browsers we want our tests to run in. So here, for example, we have select Google Chrome and Firefox in the latest version, but there are many more browsers available. Because it takes some time to run all these tests, we will limit ourselves to 2 browsers here. And if we start this, we will now see the different browsers opening and closing and executing our tests as we defined them. Here, for example, that was the archive, and we have another test that tests the categories page, which is similar to the archives page. You can see here. And of course, we have the third test case which tests our search. You can see on the right, Selenium was entered. And that's the reason we don't want to sit around and wait for the tests to execute. Because it's not that fun to watch, and it goes quite fast, so you might not see all the things you need to validate manually. You can see here, Firefox works as well. If you run your tests in, let's say, for example, Internet Explorer, it's a little less snappy, but it's still fast enough so that you can use it without any problems. Just a second, we will be finished. All right, so all tests executed. I've created a problem with one of the tests in Firefox that we can actually see how it looks if a test fails. So here we can see Google Chrome, all tests have succeeded. And in Firefox, one test did not succeed. And if we click on the failed tests, then we can see why. And here, Firefox was unable to find the search ID field. This, of course, is now introduced bug by me, but in a real world testing scenario, this is what it would look like if a test actually failed. Now we could take a look at the screenshot, for example, and see what does not work in Firefox, or we could go ahead and test it manually in Firefox to reproduce the issue and use the developer tools in Firefox to fix it. Okay, another thing you can do here is if you want to later on start creating more sophisticated tests, or you get somebody on your team who knows a lot about Selenium and prefers to create your tests in Selenium and encode directly. You don't need to scrap all your tests and restart from scratch. You can actually export all your test cases to Selenium code by clicking on the export button and then selecting the programming language you want to use. So here we have C#, we have Java, we have Python, we have Ruby. And this way we can execute our tests to code and then run them against the integrated Selenium grid, which is also provided by BrowseEmAll here. Okay, so this looks nice and easy, but what can we do to automate this even further? We might not want to have a tester open BrowseEmAll on their machine, selecting the test suite in question, and then wait until the test execution is finished, because it's advisable not to use your machine during the test execution, as new browser windows are popping up and closing again, and you will not get anything done. So you could create a dedicated testing machine, like a CI server or a dedicated browser testing server, to do this in the background manually. For example, you could run your test suite every time somebody commits to your repository, or whenever you deem necessary, or every night, for every new release, whatever works for your workflow. And this is of course also possible. We can use a command line, the command line interface of BrowseEmAll, to execute one or more specific tests automatically. And then BrowseEmAll will automatically create the necessary results files so that we can interpret the results in an automated fashion on the CI server and only get notified if any tests fail. And for this, the command line is quite easy. We give BrowseEmAll the run tests command parameter, and of course we will need to tell it the path to our test suite. This can, of course, if the test suite lives in your Git repository, you can reference this here as a file so that always the updated test suite is run. And we also need to tell BrowseEmAll with the browsers flag which browsers we want our tests to run in. Again, here we have Google Chrome and Firefox in the latest version. And if we fire this off, we will see BrowseEmAll starting automatically and executing our tests as we've seen before manually. The difference is that for one, we will get an XML file at the end that tells us which tests failed and which didn't. And we will also, the application will automatically close again after the tests have been executed. Here we can see again that it works quite nicely on Google Chrome. It tests our search, our archives, and our categories page, including taking screenshots, validating elements on the page, stuff like that. And here is Firefox, which will execute our tests as well. Maybe we can get a glimpse of what did not work with the blog search test here. See, categories work, archives work, and now the blog search. And actually it did work just fine. Okay. So after the test execution, we have a result XML file, which would be interpreted by your CI server automatically. Take a look at how it looks. just like that. We can see here are the different test cases, and all have been executed and all have the result success. We can even see how much time it took to execute each individual test case and the overall time, just over a minute. And it will also tell us how many asserts are in each test case, because a test case that doesn't validate or assert anything most likely is not very effective, because the page could be broken and the test might not even recognize this. And in addition to this, we can also see the screenshots for the executed pages. Here, the screenshot of the tested has been saved automatically. Here, for example, is the screenshot for the page with the post details. Now, if anything would be wrong with the, for example, we validate the image, and if the image would be missing, we would see this here on the screenshot right away. Okay, and with this simple process and just a few steps, you can get a lot of automated tests done already and ready to execute without having to hire a tester that's sophisticated in Selenium and, for example, Java or any other programming language, even though this, of course, helps to later see what's wrong on the actual page, but creating the tests itself is rather easy to do. So I'm already at the end of our demonstration for today. Does anybody have any questions? Then please use the GoToWebinar questions UI to enter them. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending.